Denise. Welcome back to the Victim to Victor podcast. How are you today?
I'm doing great, Anu. Thank you so much for having me back again.
Oh, it's an absolute pleasure. And today we have a very interesting topic to discuss, and it's going to be on the difficulty with relationships with family and friends for those of us who have undergone trauma or who may be currently undergoing trauma. So this topic of discussion is an important one for myself and Denise, and for many of you out there, I assume, because when you are going through your own traumas, it is going to impact on how you have relationships with people, the ability to connect, the ability to bond, and the ability to trust. And especially those who have undergone trauma from a childhood, from the young age of 3 or 4, then that's when you are actually developing at a very primal rate. So secure attachment is vital. And for those of us who may have been abused at such a young age, we do tend to lose that secure attachment, which leads to, a lot of the trauma episodes that we experience at a later age. And so today we will be discussing difficulty with relationships with family and friends. And Denise is also here to obviously resonate with these discussions and to share her own experiences with us. So, I think what's important is to maybe, identify the different types of trauma from a young age that many of us may experience. Denise, I know, you're quite fascinated by trauma as well, and developmental trauma. So it'd be good for you to maybe share your own experiences of this as you obviously became an adult.
Right. So I think we're pretty fortunate in the last few years that there's been a lot of research into childhood trauma and the impacts on relationships and attachment, all the things that you discussed. It wasn't something that was really well known about 10 years ago, and it wasn't broadly shared about how these childhood experiences can really impact you into adulthood and impact your adult relationships, not just your childhood relationships. And I think it's really important for people who have experienced trauma to kind of self-educate around that. There's a lot of material that you can find out on the internet to help you understand. And for me, it was really enlightening to read through the different types of attachments that happen based on your experiences. And these attachment disorders or complications, they can happen because of childhood experiences. They can happen because of traumatic experiences in adulthood. And for me to learn and read about a description that was like, oh my gosh, that describes what I was going through for so long. And it was just helpful to me. We were talking before the recording started that I figured out I was normally abnormal or, normally unhealthy. Well, I was responding to the situation the best I could. As you mentioned, when you're a young child, your brain's still developing, your personality, your worldview, all of those things are in flux, being formed. And when you get impacted with this kind of trauma, with the sexual abuse in particular that we've experienced, it is really hard to, as a child, know that that's something outside of yourself. You totally internalize it. And it's so impactful for me. It was, like you said, it set me up for not being able to trust. I lost trust in the people who were supposed to be the ones that loved me and took care of me and treasured me and cherished me. And instead, I had this horrible experience. And so trust has always been a big issue for me. Not sure that I can trust people and not sure that I could understand if what they told me was true. I second guess myself a lot. Is what they're telling me really true? Or am I just so naive? I'm not seeing the obvious that they're going to hurt me, just as soon as I give them an opportunity. That I didn't trust my ability to be with people. I didn't trust my ability to read people and understand people, because here I had been looking at these people that I was supposed to trust, and they hurt me so badly. And so that was a really difficult thing, to move into a place where I could build up my trust in myself and my capabilities and my ability to be in the world and not be afraid to trust my instincts and my intuition about people. But I went through some times where I was so naive about people. I really wanted it to be, this is a face value. This is what the person's presenting. This is who they really are. But that's not necessarily how people live in the world. And it was a hard lesson many times over, heart on your sleeve. That's what people would always say. I had my heart on my sleeve. And I just wanted people to be good to me, be kind to me, to love me. And I was looking for that, but I wasn't able to understand how people are complex and people, can be multiple things over different time periods. And I just was not able to understand socially how that worked because I just had such a screwed up experience as a kid.
Yeah. Do you think a lot of this started off at a very young age? When you were at school, were you able to form bonds with other girls, friendships?
Yeah, it was really hard for me. I was a tomboy anyway, so I kind of was on the outside. I like to literally get dirty, play in the creek and ride my bike all over the place and play sports. So I didn't bond a lot with the girls at that time. I was in Girl Scouts, so I did kind of hang out with girls. I had friends that were girls, but for me, it was always something inside me said, you're different and you're not worthy of being, a friend. I had such a bad impression and understanding of myself and blamed myself for things that I was like, and I was afraid too to get too close because I didn't want anyone to really know. It was that fear of if they get to know me, then really know me, then they're going to realize what a horrible, rotten person I am.
Wow.
And I was afraid. I was afraid to let people get too close because I had been convinced that I was this worthless creature. And if I would present, I'd get good grades. I'd worked really hard. I was, trying to be the best person I can be. But behind that was the fear always of being revealed, people figuring it out, people learning about it. And then I thought I'd lose everything.
Wow.
So there's always a distance that I had to keep. And I couldn't really relate a lot to other kids because I wasn't a kid anymore. What I had experienced had removed me from that childlike experience. I didn't get other kids. I was like, so it was very isolating. It was very lonely and isolating, even though I would hang out with folks, there's always this distance in my head and in my heart. And I was just a really lonely kid.
Wow, yeah. So it sounds like you had your barriers up at all times, keeping people at arm's length. And there's a really powerful words, what you said about yourself, that people would start to realize who you really were. You really wasn't that. That was just your own belief system about yourself, which had developed from such a young age. And it's quite sad because I feel that a lot of kids out there must feel the same about themselves, where they're looking themselves in the mirror and they hate what they see. It's such a sad state of affairs, and it's all down to self-esteem and, how one feels about themselves. Are you finding this a lot? I don't know if you have any connections these days with any children. Are you finding that this low self-esteem issue is still in existence?
Yeah, I think I don't have contact outside of like my sister's children and things, family members, but I think it's even worse. I think that these kids have to live in a world of social media where they're, by the nature of the devices, separated. And, even if they're sitting next to each other, they're chatting through their phones, they're not connecting on a personal level. And there's so much bullying and so much that you can say anonymously and be so mean and cruel. It really is an environment that marinates all the sort of negativity. And I just really feel sorry for these kids because there's just so much, they're inundated all the time with all these messages. And on social media, you've got these people that put all these filters on their videos. So, the young kids think that that's the way you're supposed to look and it's all glamorous and great. And all they hear is the really positive stuff and that everyone's claiming that their lives are full of, and they can't help but compare. And then adding on top of it, the, bullying that can go on. It's just, it's overwhelming to think about these poor kids going through that. And really, they haven't been taught about resiliency and how to take care of themselves and self-care. And, I just think it's probably even more challenging today than when I was growing up and there wasn't that kind of technology around.
Yeah, for sure. Do you find that everybody does undergo some form of trauma as they're, becoming an adult?
I think we all have challenging experiences. I'm not sure if everyone would be going through something that would be officially, from a mental health perspective, identified as trauma. I think a lot of what I've learned from mental health professionals is that the trauma is trauma because of how you react to it. There's certain situations that are incredibly challenging and can be traumatic for an individual, but it depends on that individual. Some people are very resilient. They've had really supportive families, and they're able to get through that without it becoming one of the defining moments of their life. It's not traumatic, it's just challenging. And I don't know all the nuances of what tips the scale in that. I think that if you're a young child and you're sexually abused, that pretty much is going to be trauma, because you don't have any way to make that less than what it is. But I think there's other people that go through experiences that could be devastating for someone that doesn't have that resource internally or the support system for them. It can be very traumatic and go through many of those challenges. And other people, for some reason, are able to go through that without those events being traumatizing. So absolutely. As human beings, we're challenged all the time. Does something become traumatic? Very easily it can, but I think it is something that has a lot of factors that come into play to determine if it's going to be a trauma, especially as you get older, and how much of a trauma is it? Is it something that is overwhelming and you never recover from, or is it, overwhelming in the moment and then you work your way through it eventually? And so I think it's really depends on the situation, depends on the experience, and it depends on the person. But in my mind, again, childhood abuse is just, by definition, is going to be traumatic, because there's no resource really internally for children to fall back on. And often, if the abuse occurred, it's in an environment where there's no supportive resources to recover.
Absolutely. And there's a lot on the internet for those of you who are interested in learning more about this. There is a lot about developmental trauma and just the impacts on identity formation as one, becomes an adult. And then there's, it's very important to understand like the attachment styles. Don't know if you want to explore on attachment styles, because as I mentioned already, secure attachment is obviously what we require as from a young age. But unfortunately, when one is traumatized, then it leads to a lot of other types of attachments, such as dismissive avoidant, fearful avoidant, anxious, preoccupied attachments. And again, these all interfere with your brain development. So which ones do you think that you suffered from as a consequence of your childhood trauma?
Reading them, it's like, well, I feel like there are a little bit of all of them, but I think that really the one is anxiety-based, attachment, and just not feeling like I had anyone had my back. And with that, when we're, using this language about attachment styles, it's good as an adult to recognize that, because we can learn about it and then we can learn to move through that and out of that. These attachment styles are a tool and a description to help people understand their current state, but it's not a life sentence. It's not something that we can't grow out of. So for me, it's information. It's simply information that I say, oh, okay, this sounds like where I have been having my experience, but that gives me a starting point where I can start to figure out how to work with a therapist or do some work to move out of that situation. So I think all of these things are useful tools and are not something we want to try to self-label with to beat ourselves up and maybe make excuses, but just to say, hey, I recognize this behavior pattern in me, and I see now how it might have come out of the abuse. So what does that mean for me? How do I use this information to move away from this type of behavior? Because these not secure attachments have consequences in your life that are not necessarily a positive thing. We all want to be close to people, but how we can do that, how we can approach that, how comfortable we are with that is defined in these different attachment styles. And I think it's helpful for people to understand what is kind of working in their world and in their hearts so that they can figure out where to go from there. But yeah, and it's not all clear cut and, cookie cutter. I think that, like me, I kind of feel like I cover a few. What about you, Anu? What do you think is working in your space, or used to be, and what was working?
God. Well, the big one was insecure. I felt so insecure about myself, about everyone around me. And I think that really led to my low self-esteem and insecurity issues growing older, which led to a lot of other occurrences, such as obviously, not feeling good about myself and trying to find love from the wrong people. The fact that I did feel like my childhood was lost, and, I did feel like something was missed during my development. And also, it talks about avoidance of relationships, but I wasn't really avoiding relationships. I think I was trying to have relationships with people, but they were just the wrong relationships, which I know that, you've spoken about that as well. And I think it's just avoidance. Did you find that you were trying to avoid yourself or being with people? Because you did say that you were on your own. And I know that there's a lot of people who do like to be on their own, which, it's all to do with, how they feel about themselves, right?
Yeah, and I'm an introvert, and so that's kind of my natural tendency was to enjoy being by myself. I didn't mind playing records and reading books when I was a kid and watching a little bit of television, whatever, by myself. I was comfortable with that. But I so desperately wanted to be loved. There was a kind of hole in my nuclear family where my mom was busy with her business, my dad was busy with his practice, and there wasn't a lot of affection and love shown. And I just was craving someone to love me. And a lot of that was proved to me I was worth loving, that kind of thing. And so, I would get positive feedback from teachers, which, really got me into doing well in school. Yeah. I flipped in that direction. I could have easily flipped in the direction of dysfunctionality and becoming a discipline issue and acting out and all of that, which some people do. Some people, that's how they manage their needs to get attention and to get some kind of response from people, is to go that direction. But luckily for me, because I was already interested in school, I went that direction for positive reinforcement that kept that cycle of focusing on school going. But I just was so desperate to be loved. And, I ran into some not so great relationships from that. I was stubborn and smart enough, I guess, to not go too far into some of those things, that some part of me was keeping me safe. Some part of me kept me from really sticking around very long with things that weren't turning out right. It doesn't mean that I didn't notice it at first, but at least I kind of figured it out. But it's hard, because you're not trusting yourself. You want to trust someone. You want to be in a relationship where you can share a lot of yourself with them. And it's just hard to know how to do that if you were never shown that as a kid. That's what we got to be shown how to do that by our parents. And if you never see that, were you having any good role models for how to have good relationships in your family?
Well, no, because I didn't even know what love was. I mean, I used to be asked it by a lot of people and even past relationships, and I had no idea what love was. I'm thinking, what is this thing, that everyone goes on about? Because we didn't really communicate. I love you, Obviously, I'm doing it now because I've had a little boy and he says it to me, Mama, I love you. And I'm just like, that is so cute, because it wasn't in our vocabulary, we just didn't say that. And we didn't express love to each other either. There was no hugging, kissing, And so, it's a strange upbringing, really, compared to how life is now, because I feel like there's so much love everywhere all the time. Obviously, I don't know what it's like in individual households, but I do notice it around social media. There's a lot of love hearts around, and I love that, I love seeing that, because it's people showing affection towards each other. And it's just emotions as well. Like showing emotions to people. Wow, I was just so cold. It was like frozen. I remember just being frozen, and just when people came to hug me, I'd be like, what are you doing? Get off me. There's no warmth about me. And it's so sad, really, when I look back. It is quite sad that, that's all I knew. Yes.
Yeah, you're just trying to protect yourself. I think that's what it feels, from what I'm hearing, it feels like you were trying to protect yourself because you've been so hurt. You didn't feel like you could trust people. And for us as abuse survivors, our physical bodies, we didn't have control over it. Someone took control over our physical bodies. And for us, we were trying to figure out, how do I establish a boundary? And as an adult, there's an option. It's like, no touching,
Wow,
not even hugs. And that's the thing that we learned. If, as a child, it was black and white. It was one extreme or another. And so, the responses we developed was, okay, that's it. There is no touching. There's, and then it's like, well, but I kind of want that, but no, there's no touching. It's like you're kind of going crazy with yourself because you want something, but you're afraid of it. You're drawn to it, but you're trying to avoid it. And that's what I felt was just so screwed up about the situation is how do I deal with the normal human thing of wanting to be intimate and close to people when I'm terrified of being intimate and close to people, and working through that and slowly learning how to find the right relationships, how to bring the right people into my life that I could trust, and learning that people should earn that trust. When I was young, it was, for some reason, I just, expected to trust everybody to, because I wanted love so desperately. I was like, okay, I'm just going to trust people, at the same time, I don't trust them. There's this weird thing. I want to trust you. I'm going to leap into it. Yeah. Even if I expect it not to go well, I'm going to leap into it. Here's this weird duality where I'm experiencing both trusting everyone and not trusting anybody. It was very strange, but I just, would go into situations, and slowly as an adult, I learned, I have the right to say, you got to earn my trust. Okay. That you have to, I'm not going to make you jump through hoops, but I'm going to observe you. I'm going to watch what you do. Do you keep your word? Yeah. Do you show up when you say you're going to show up? Do you support me? Are you honest with me? Can I trust you? Have you proven that I can trust you? Even if I'm not saying that to the person, it's just in my head. Yeah. I slowly learned, okay, these are the people who show up and are authentic and honest and true, and I'm going to let them in my life. And these other people are kind of kept on the periphery and, developing those kind of relationships. But still to this day, I'm not a person that has a lot of really close friends. It's because there's still that place where I'm like, you really, really need to be able to trust you with my story, with my experience and what I've gone through. And can I trust you to show up? Because sometimes people are pretty flaky. Yeah, exactly. So, that's kind of been my experience is learning what I need to do to feel comfortable in a relationship and expecting that person to meet me halfway and it be a healthy place for both of us.
Oh, I love that. It's all about, what I'm hearing is, your value now, you're setting boundaries, and you're in tune with your, emotions and your intuition, and you're selecting who you want to be part of your life. I mean, vulnerability, right? That is a huge thing for us. And I know that I struggle with that, just showing vulnerability. And obviously that, goes hand in hand with the ego and the protective defense mechanisms, that we have put up. And I know that, again, just trying to be vulnerable daily, that's been a huge thing for me. Kind of, this podcast has really helped with that because I'm opening up to people, like the whole world. And that's being vulnerable, right?
Mm-hmm, for sure. So when you say you try to be vulnerable every day, can you give me some examples of what that means for you to show up and be vulnerable?
Sure, yeah. I mean, for these days now, for example, if someone asks me, my friends, how you doing? I don't say, oh, yeah, I'm fine. No, I'm honest. I say, I'm having a real bad day today. I don't feel too good. And I'm just honest, right? Because there's no point in me, lying anymore, because what am I going to gain? I'm just going to suffer in silence. And, just on a daily basis, I guess, even sometimes, on social media, if I want to put out a post of, how I'm feeling, something, which will help me to heal, because I've obviously found healing in writing and expressing myself, whether it's on a platform such as Facebook or Instagram, or, if it's just even writing, a blog, or, writing another script for my podcast. For me, that's me opening up and being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and it sounds a really wonderful way to express yourself, to open yourself up for more healing, and in being vulnerable, you're able to help other people through your process and through what you've experienced, and sharing how they can have that kind of experience too. So I think that's really, really important for people to be able to do that. For me, it's trying new things, because I have a real fear of failure. Somehow that got part of my process. And I talked about before in our conversations about being this perfectionist. I developed this perfectionism in response to trying to gain control of my life. And so for me, there's a lot of internal pressure that I've had throughout my life to be perfect and do everything correctly. And the risk of failure goes up exponentially when you have to be perfect, and for me to say it's okay to try something and not do it as good as you wanted to. For me, that exploration happens in doing new things within the space of expressive arts, and trying new things in photography and that sort of thing. So places I feel pretty comfortable with and pretty stable, I can explore and out from those areas and do new things. And occasionally, like my husband or I will try to, let's go to this new place, or let's try this new thing. And so I'm gain confidence in being open to failure, and being open to enjoying it just because it's something to do, and not having to have a particular outcome out of it. That's the control thing. I've got to have it be like this and do this and end up with this result, but being open to the fact it should be a process, and explore it. And that process is enough in itself. That's where I try to be vulnerable. And then it opens up to being allowing connection. If I don't have to be perfect, I'm not comparing myself to other people. I'm just being able to be with people and relate to them, and be open to understanding and communicating with them. So letting go of that perfectionism opens up a lot of things for me when I'm able to do that.
Yeah. I love that as well, because you're basically open to rejection and negative reinforcement. Wow. Yeah, for me, definitely. And that's something I've been looking at is, really that should be your greatest motivator. When somebody rejects you, right? You don't dwindle on it and cry at the loss. You go out there and you say, right, that wasn't for me. What next? What is for me? I've learned from this experience. A
little self-reflection on, okay, well, what happened there? What part of that was my part? I want to understand what I brought to that. Did I contribute in some way? Let me evaluate that. And so a lot of times you have to say that had nothing to do with me. That was all them. All their stuff, and just say that's okay. I don't have to take ownership of other people's stuff. I can just say, okay, that just, and like you said, that didn't work out. That doesn't mean nothing will ever work out again. We don't get this tunnel vision. I quote, failed at whatever X, Y, and Z was, a relationship or, new experience, and therefore I'm a failure and I'll never succeed again. It's hard not to go into that place. But if we can say, you know what, no matter what, I'm going to learn from this. And it may actually open up a door or to something I never thought of before. It may be a stepping stone along the way. And I'm not actually supposed to stay in this space. I'm supposed to step through it, learn something from it, and move on to something else. But I have to go this path through that in order to get to the place I really need to be. So sometimes we don't have to think of these as like dead ends. We can just think of them as stepping stones along the way to where we're really, truly headed.
Yeah. And like saying that, it just reminds me of my days of job interviews. I've always loved job interviews. I remember the days I used to dread them, but then I started to realize that I'm actually learning so much about myself in job interviews, because it's an hour of my life where it's all about me and I'm able to express myself and what I've achieved. And it's actually been an ego boost for me, in the last years or so. And I just thought, wow, for some reason, you're never given an opportunity to express yourself the way that you do in a job interview. I think it's such a powerful, like meeting for anybody. And that's why, my advice is never refuse an interview, because you'll be surprised at, what comes out. I guess, it's a bit like us doing this podcasting. There's no point in planning it, because we're just going to go with the flow, and, wherever it takes us, it's going to be the messages that we need to communicate across to the listeners right now.
Yeah, I love what you said about a job interview. I never thought of it that way, but it brings up a good point that, at least here in the States, culturally, you're getting a lot of messages as a kid of not bragging about yourself and not giving too big an ego. And it was a lot of contain yourself, and don't talk about yourself. And at least that's the messaging I received when I was growing up. It was selfish to do that. And unless you were an extremely popular kid that everybody loved, it's like, keep it down. And we don't spend time congratulating ourselves, saying, you know what, I did a really good job there. That was really great. We look to other people to do that for us, but to be able to say, hey, nice job, Denise, that was really good. Congratulations. You should stop and appreciate what you just did, whether it's being nice to someone or doing great at work. Yeah. I don't know how often I do that. And that's a really interesting thing to think about, is can I be more of my own cheerleader, in an authentic, honest way, to say, good job. Keep going, keep doing that. That's a great job. So sometimes we need that voice from somewhere. And if we're not really getting support externally, we can start doing that for ourselves.
We have to, yeah. And I feel, self-celebration, it's huge. And I think we need to promote that more, because, I was even thinking recently about the fact that, we kind of live our life just waiting to get married, so we can share our lives with somebody else and to, grow together and compromise. But when do we ever marry ourselves? I mean, shouldn't that be the number one thing that we do before we actually marry somebody else? I mean, we don't even know who we are at the age of 20 or so. And people are already in relationships, which is great. I understand, you learn about yourself and you grow a lot in relationships. But then I think, to actually marry somebody so young, when you haven't even figured out who you are as, as a being, I think, I don't know, I just feel there's more to be done around that. And I think the world is changing. There's a lot more people becoming self-aware from a very young age. And, I'm seeing some 20-year-olds on YouTube, and, I'm thinking they are mature, they've got it. That they have a good life ahead of them, because they're just so wise and they're so self-aware. So I think times are really changing. Then people aren't as unaware of themselves as probably we were when we were younger.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot more messaging out there that supports people exploring themselves and understanding themselves better and figuring out what it is that they want from life. There's a lot of different ways to do that. With that's the benefit, at least from social media, that we can get that and see people who are role models, beyond our limited interactions that we could have had back in the day before all the social media. Now, you've got a lot of good role models. If you look for them, you can find them that can inspire you, and lots of books to read. So it's so easy to get materials online, and we're in a really good space for people who genuinely want to do that kind of work. Yeah. It is amazing to me. Some of these folks, like you said, in their 20s, early 30s, it's like, wow, they've really been doing their work. I'm learning from them, because they've got all these wise things to say. I'm like, all right, this is really encouraging that people are taking the time to do that. And I love what you said about marrying yourself. That for me, I really had to do that. I really had to step back from relationships and say, what do I want? Because if I'm just reacting and to things out of my history of trauma and surviving that's not taking me where I want to go. So I spent a lot of time reading and trying to understand what I was doing and looking at my behaviors and saying, well, what do I like? What do I not like? Why am I doing this? I ask myself that a lot. Why did I just do that? What am I doing that for? And what's the outcome of that? Can I look at the full thing from what led me to do that and what's going to be the outcome? Because a lot of times we just do and we don't think about the long-term outcome. But if you kind of step back and look at that, that's when you see these patterns in your life, and you're like, oh my gosh, look at that. Whenever X, Y, whenever my girlfriends say or do this, I react this way. Well, why is that? What am I afraid of, or what do I need? A lot of times there is something that we need that comes out as anger or other kind of emotions because we have an unmet need. And if we can start digging a little deeper and understanding that, then we can say, oh, I don't have to react this way. I don't have to push people away or get angry or get, really terribly emotional in a way that is not helping me to heal, because I need to understand what I need. And maybe what I need is quiet time. Maybe what I need is people time. What is it you really need in order to start healing and start connecting with people in a way that you want to, in a healthy way? But that takes some downtime, some slow time, some me time, and we have to make time like that for ourselves and disconnect a little bit from maybe social media. Like you were saying before the recording, I took a laptop holiday, whatever it is. But it's hard. It's hard to do that because of our busy lives, but it's a little scary to do that.
It is. Yeah. So that was a laptop detox that I had, and I just needed it. I felt really burnt out by technology. And again, it's all about self-care, looking after oneself. And this is what happens. I think, when you do become self-aware and, when you do become healed, then, it's really important to take some time out from the whole doing process, that we're in, just constantly just doing and working and going places and watching things. It's like just sitting there in still silence. There's the power of silence. It is really effective. So let's just say, there's obviously somebody who has been abused and then they're entering into relationships. What would be the kind of tell signs from your own experience where somebody may be impacting their relationship, where the trauma may be impacting their relationship?
Yeah, I think the way it kind of showed up for me was, I wanted the intimacy, but anytime that would come, there would be a reason, an excuse not to be physically intimate, not to make that emotional connection. I always felt myself holding back, and if you're feeling yourself holding back and not really wanting to be vulnerable, like we were talking about, not really wanting to be honest, not really wanting to show up as yourself. Yeah. If you're always having to be somebody else or be what you think that other person wants you to be, if you can't be your authentic self and in that relationship, that's a big flag to me that this isn't the relationship that you need, and is probably going to keep triggering and re-traumatizing you because you're not getting what you need out of the relationship. And so I think can you be fully yourself without being afraid of being rejected? You don't want to ever get in a relationship where you got to be somebody else in order to have the relationship.
God,
and if you can get to the point where you don't even have that energy, you don't even think in that mindset, you're just yourself. You just show up as yourself, and it's not an effort to be that, because you can let down your boundaries and your barriers to what would be an ability to have a healthy relationship. Obviously, healthy relationships have proper boundaries, but these are extra boundaries that we've built brick walls to keep people out. You can let those go and just, be your authentic self. I think that's the type of relationship you want to head into. And if you can't do that, then that's a sign, that something maybe need to be looked at a little bit. So what about you? What are you thinking are some signs?
Well, I know for me, it was definitely the fight or flight, because, I know a lot of that's to do with our cortex, part of the brain, which is our stress response, right? And for me, it was always, I know that was always triggered whenever I was in a relationship. So, I'd always get really stressed out, and then I'd either freeze, like I said, if anybody came to touch me, or, my way of actually escaping would be through drink and drugs, obviously toxic forms of stimulants, which helped me to kind of, let go of my fear And that enabled me to get physical with my partners, which, wasn't ideal because it didn't come from a very natural and sober state. And, I guess that's how I survived for many years in relationships. And it was only later on in my life when I started to realize that, I can't actually get intimate with anybody unless I'm high or drunk. So it's and that's when I knew that there was an issue. Mm. So, yeah, and I know shame as well, that plays a big part with us, because we're constantly shameful of ourselves, and there's toxic
our bodies
shame.
themselves, just for me, it was a lot of body shame that I really didn't like my body. And it was this twisted thing that if someone liked me, it was almost like, well, they're liking me for the wrong reason. My grandfather taught me that my body was a dirty thing that attracted the wrong kind of attention. And so anytime anybody was kind of paying attention to me, it's like part of me was like excited because, there's someone that was interested in me and maybe could show me some love. And at the same time, there was this other part of me that was like, must be something wrong with them because, this kind of attraction is only going to hurt you. And so it was a tug of war all the time. And to be able to get to the place where it's like, no, this is natural. This is not what you experienced as a child. This is part of being an adult and being natural and, sharing your love with someone and working through that voice and getting rid of that voice of the past so that I wasn't afraid of being touched or afraid of someone expressing their love for me physically. It was a big challenge to get through that. And occasionally that's triggered, even now there might be something that comes up and, it's just something that really made me very mad, when I realized kind of where it was coming from, it really made me mad and sad also that I had to deal with it, that this was something that I had to carry into my adulthood because of what happened to me. And, that I had to make the work and the extra effort to get from the place I was to where normal people live who have, sort of a more normal opinion of their bodies. I know that there's body shaming in a lot of ways in our culture these days. And so people have difficulties loving themselves and their bodies because of the body shaming. So my heart goes out to these people that have that kind of experience. But, this was something someone taught me at a young age, and it took me a long time to unravel that, to be able to move beyond that feeling about my body and say, you know what, I can give pleasure to someone, they can give pleasure to me, we can have pleasure together. And it can be a really beautiful thing, but I have to let that happen and gain the trust that I need to make sure that I can feel safe in that situation.
Yeah, and I know another thing is also just, resetting our beliefs and negative beliefs about relationships because, it's all about trying to let go of any limiting beliefs that we might have and just the beliefs that we're not worthy of a true, an essence relationship. So, and again, a lot of therapy and coaching can help one to, overcome these negative beliefs because it's just all just your own self-talk. It's how you've taught yourself to believe, and it is changeable, right? Because, myself and Denise have both had to do this work to turn our minds into a more positive mindset. So what other tips do you have for trauma survivors?
I think like we were saying at the beginning, I think learning more about this area, about attachment and about relationships and how your trauma can be impacting your current relationships and how learning about that and maybe getting together with someone to talk about it, a mental health professional, you can work through that and take your experiences and relationships to a even better level of experience for you and the other people in your life. It is something that, like you said, it can change. It can be something that you can improve. And I think we deserve that. I think that we deserve to give ourselves that gift of living a more fully connected life than maybe we have felt comfortable or safe doing. So it's worth exploring what that is and what that would mean for you as a thriver.
Yeah.
As a victor.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, and also I just think, it's important to start talking, sharing your story to friends and relatives, obviously anybody who you can trust, to your therapist, because it's just by sharing your story that's going to start your journey of healing and growth. So, and it's just so therapeutic, when you just openly talk about it, because it just really unleashes a lot of the negative attachment that you might have to the trauma. So definitely, I think that's going to be the number one thing that you can do. And just self-care, look after yourselves, look after your mind and your brain, and, try and stay away from negative people and people that are going to bring you down. Just try and surround yourselves with people that will lift you and empower you and contribute towards your growth. So, yeah, it's been an absolute honour to have you on again, Denise. Thank you so much for sharing your, views and your knowledge and expertise on trauma and its impact on relationships. And I look forward to another episode with you because we have many more to do.
Thank you, Anu.
Yeah, thank you so much. So, and until our next episode, take care, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. And we will see you on our next show. And while this episode comes to an end, you may want to check out my book, Victim to Victor, now available on audio, and where I have shared my journey of evolving through self-help and a determination to cast off my damaging past. My goal is to reach out to fellow survivors of abuse and provide hope and motivation in their lives. I hope that I can help victors transform their lives and achieve amelioration in the process of discovering their true self. I also have a 12-week self-development plan, which is absolutely free, and it aims to guide you on your journey to recovery. You can find the link in the description below. Please like this podcast and tag or share it with somebody whom you know is going through a similar situation and may need help. I will be back with another podcast soon. Until then, take care and stay empowered.